What do you think voters really care about at this moment and maybe looking forward to the next year and a half? Because 2020 was largely a referendum on Trump. What do you think they care about now?
I can tell you what message, we haven't talked about this yet, that really still plays. Uh, and you can argue this out, it's good and bad. Uh, it's taking on the system. So Donald Trump took on the system big time in 16. The secret to that win, which has still been underreported, is there was an economic squeeze happening, especially in the middle of the country where wages weren't going up nearly as high, as fast as cost. And people were having trouble making ends meet. He hit that chord solidly and carried that in himself to the White House. I still think, especially in the Republican Party, obviously they're going against an incumbent Democratic president. Um, they are going after the system with reckless abandon. I think you see that still from the former president. You certainly see that from Governor DeSantis, who said in his inauguration speech in Florida for a second term that he's going to take on the bureaucrats in Washington with everything he's got. I think that's still a very salient message, and it's still a driver in this country where polls show that up to 75% of Americans thinking we're headed in the wrong direction. Some think we're falling off the cliff. There's some polling suggesting that we're headed toward a civil war, that we're headed to a major league depression. So when you're into that environment where people are really concerned and fearful, and you look around and say, why is this? I think the system is always an easy and natural target. And because Republicans are the outsiders in this campaign, in other words, they're not sitting there in the White House. They have an ability, or they have the flexibility to go after that particular dynamic, which I think is where the public mood is right now, with total abandon.
Donald Trump in 2016, like you said, his main message was, hey, I'm an outsider. I'm not part of what he called the swamp. Do you think it's almost wise if someone kind of, revises that playbook a little bit, but takes most of it and say, hey, I'm not a Washington insider as well?
No question, which is why almost every one of the contenders is a non-federal contender. I mean, you have Nikki Haley, former governor. Tim Scott would be an exception to that rule. Pence served most of his career in Congress and the Senate. So I think the outsider thing is alive and well. The former president's still talking about that. Again, the governor is still very much focused on that. I think everybody is. And what's interesting, it's really interesting. Donald Trump served as president of the United States for 4 years, and yet he's still using the outsider card. And within the big part of the base, I think it still works for him. He behaves like an outsider. He sees the world as an outsider. He communicates as an outsider. And I think that's powerful. And that's something I think the governor of Florida and others understand and are going at that particular thematic with everything they've got.
I want to talk more about voters and something that I saw that struck me. The New York Times just reported this week. Millennials are not an exception. They've moved to the right. Over the last decade, almost every cohort of voters under 50 has shifted rightward. So basically, younger people getting more conservative as they grow up. Does that theme surprise you?
No, having grown up somewhat myself. No, I mean you tend to get more conservative through life. This is not, maybe this isn't the right analogy, but I remember years ago, when former Philadelphia Mayor Frank Rizzo, who was a titan in that part of the world, he said that a conservative is a liberal who was mugged last night. Now, that has to do with crime, but conservatism, I think, is a reflection of when you have more and more responsibilities in life, you tend to grow, I think, just naturally a bit more conservative. But the thing that's a counterweight to that, to be fair, is you've got a younger generation who are now voting in bigger numbers than ever before because of mail-in balloting. That has completely changed kind of the math in politics today, where we used to write off, frankly, the under 30 vote for the most part, certainly in the off years. In the presidential years, they were a part of it, but they weren't seriously a part of it. Now they are. But I think so. I think the under 30 crowd, I think that's a dynamic and a demographic that Republicans have to find a way to make more inroads into. If not, and this is not just a Republican challenge, it's a Democratic challenge. There's been all this talk, Brittany, about the rise of a third rail, a third party, an independent movement. And I think young people are more open to that than anybody else. And I think the messaging coming from Republicans needs to understand that, anticipate that, and kind of communicate like that. If they were to try to take a part of a younger demographic that they don't quite have a stranglehold on today.